your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. I'm Naveen Day. The Lethbridge Police Service has a warning to not fall victim to sextortion. That is a form of blackmail where young people are being targeted. As Angela Stewart reports, the Lethbridge school divisions are taking action to spread awareness of the danger as an increase in cases are being reported to police.
What we've seen over the past year is a huge increase in receiving these reports.
It's a concerning trend in our city where youth are becoming victims to sextortion.
It could happen to anyone. Our youth are specifically exploited because the increased relationships online that are occurring with people they haven't met before.
Sextortion, which is also a form of blackmail, is when a predator online threatens to send sexually explicit pictures or videos of the victim if they are not paid money or given more sexual content.
So what we're seeing with kids is a lot more time on Instagram and Snapchat. And through that, there's increased ability for them to be exploited.
LPS say this year they have received 43 reports of blackmail and extortion, which doubled from the previous year.
That's one thing that we're working with our school divisions is how can we incorporate digital citizenship, online safety presentations.
We do have a digital citizenship scope and sequence kind of a curriculum that is available for students to learn through their teachers.
The Holy Spirit Catholic School Division says in part with supporting their students, they offer a user agreement, which ultimately opens up the conversation of safe technology use.
You know, it encourages parents to monitor what their children are doing. Social media and apps and all these things are not going away. It's very much a part of what students and all of us are engaged in.
The Lethbridge School Division echoing that sentiment. In a statement, they say teaching students how to responsibly and safely use technology is a shared responsibility. Reading in part, the division will continue to provide educational and skill-building opportunities to support students and families. LPS say of the 43 reports filed to them, they've not resulted in any charges to date. They're also encouraging parents to have those important conversations with their kids about the potential risks of sextortion. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
The Lethbridge Hurricanes are set to finish their last few games of the preseason schedule this weekend. Players and coaches are gearing up for the start of the regular season, which begins on September 24th. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, there was a strong feeling of hope for this season as players are preparing for their next preseason game.
Canes players skated in unison and took in the morning practice on Wednesday at the NMAX Center. Last year, the team's season ended early in the first round of the playoffs after being swept in 4 games during their first round series against the Edmonton Oil Kings. The assistant general manager and one of the assistant coaches for the Canes, Matt Anholt, says there are some keys to success that the team is looking to implement going into the regular season.
We feel like we have a pretty strong back end, a lot of returners, a lot of high-end talent back there. We need to be a big-time difference makers back there for our team to have success. We feel like we have a pretty deep forward group, but we're going to have to score by committee.
The Canes have 2 more games on September 16th and 17th to end the preseason. After that, they will suit up for the first game of the regular season on the 24th in Medicine Hat against the Tigers, and will then travel back to Lethbridge for their first home game on the 30th to face the Tigers again. Noah Chadwick, a defenseman with the Canes, says he's excited for the new season to begin.
We want to set the tone for the regular season, and I think these next 2 games are pretty important for us, and just kind of leading into the regular season, and kind of establishing how we want to play as a team for sure.
Alex Thacker, a forward with the Canes, says there are a few teams this year that they can expect stiff competition from.
Red Deer, I think, because just we're always battling with those guys throughout the season, and then Edmonton because of what they did last year, and doesn't really sit well with us going on the first round to them. So definitely those 2 teams are our biggest rivalries, I think, this year.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Coming up later in the show, it appears as though a number of Medicine Hat businesses were able to survive during the COVID-19 pandemic. Lisa Kowalchuk is the executive director of the Medicine Hat Chamber of Commerce and says a big reason why was the entrepreneurial spirit of so many business owners in southeastern Alberta.
Despite some of the challenges, we still saw a number of business start up. during a very difficult time, taking that risk and that challenge, and surviving through and becoming very successful. So it's really neat to see, again, the strength and resiliency of our business community.
Catch the interview with Lisa Kowalchuk from the Medicine Hat Chamber of Commerce with BCN producer Michael Clausen coming up later in the show. But when we return, more stories from around Alberta, including one of a major drug bust. Lethbridge, Calgary seized more than $4.5 million worth of drugs and close to $1 million in cash following a variety of drug busts. Project Carlos saw search warrants doled out at 15 locations throughout Calgary between August 24th and September 2nd. Some of the items seized include 41 kilograms of cocaine, 1 kilogram of methamphetamine, close to 3,500 fentanyl pills, and 4.2 kilograms of cannabis. A stolen handgun with ammunition was also confiscated. A number of suspects have been identified, but charges have yet to be laid. Alert investigators are still in the process of cataloging the evidence. Recent federal legislation has effectively banned handguns, leading to an unprecedented increase in sales and transfers of more than 178,000 guns since spring. Typically, applications are processed out of Miramichi, New Brunswick by the Canadian Firearms Program administered by the RCMP, and wait times have ballooned up to 6 months. Recently, Alberta Justice Minister Tyler Shandro announced an expansion of the Provincial Firearm Office with an increase in funding over the next 2 years.
This is funding that will allow us to create 40 new positions, greatly expanding the Chief Firearms Officer's ability to process license applications, transfers, authorizations to carry, and other tasks much faster, and to do it right here in Alberta. There are over 340,000 licensed, law-abiding firearms owners in Alberta, making our province home to the third largest and fastest growing rate of firearms ownership in the country.
With these new resources in place, the Provincial Firearms Office will be able to process license applications, transfers, authorizations to carry, and other administrative tasks and faster right here in Alberta. Alberta's Chief Firearms Officer Terry Bryant says she's been working during the last year to support the needs of lawful gun owners in Alberta, which many feel has been missing from the federal programs with offices in Miramichi.
Alberta's Chief Firearms Office has provided crucial public safety supports to local police services and the province's justice system, reviewing applications and conducting background checks to ensure those using and buying firearms do not represent a risk to the public is critical in supporting safe communities throughout Alberta. As the Minister mentioned, we faced a significant backlog of cases from the start. We took extraordinary steps throughout our first year to work through the backlog to address these unprecedented circumstances. We consistently pressed the Federal Service Centre to meet Albertans' needs. A chronic challenge to recruit and retain Federal Processing Centre resources in Miramichi has seriously affected the firearms program in Alberta.
The first national gathering on unmarked burials took place in Edmonton this week. Indigenous community members, federal ministers, and those from the Catholic Church responded to the reports and discussed potential next steps.
I have certainly heard, of course, the pain and the harm that residential schools have caused to children, and fully acknowledge this truth. We've heard a number of perspectives on what justice would look like for missing and murdered children. I think it still remains one of the biggest questions out there. This could look like prosecution, conviction. It could look like restorative measures for communities. It could look like commemoration. One way or the other, we know that it needs to be Indigenous-led.
There continues to be barriers in relation to access to records, and that's a big concern, not just with the federal government or the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, but with provincial governments, municipal governments, and other entities such as universities that hold records.
Earlier this month, Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage was part of a Canadian delegation that met with senior leaders, researchers, and industry at the 3-day Offshore Northern Seas Conference in Stavanger, Norway. The minister promoted Alberta's energy supply and services capability and technologies. Additionally, Minister Savage spoke at the Net Zero Market session. The United Conservative government has been promoting Alberta as a global leader in carbon capture technologies with Alberta jurisdictions such as Medicine Hat, developing carbon capture programs. Quoting Minister Savage, "In Norway, I heard repeatedly that our practical approach to responsible energy development is vital to ensuring that people have access to safe, reliable, and affordable energy while also reducing emissions. Alberta's energy is part of the long-term solution for the world and will be for decades to come," end quote. We will have more on Alberta politics and the UCP leadership hopefuls coming up after this short break. Stay with us.
I mean, it's no surprise, I don't think, that Shannon Phillips is going to run again, relatively prominent member of Rachel Notley's team, and that sort of thing. But there's going to be more of this.
Albertans are engaged and passionate about the politics of our province. This week, Hal Roberts and Tyler Dawson chatted about new poll results for the upcoming provincial election. And while Shannon Phillips says she'll be running again in her Lethbridge West riding, there are some MLAs who won't be running in 2023. Have a look.
Now, a new Leger poll is out, which asked Albertans, if an election was held right now, today, who would you vote for? And the winner would be?
It would be the UCP. Pretty narrow victory, sort of 40 to 44, I think, or 40 to 38% kind of vote split in there. It would be a narrow victory, which of course is a big change from what we were looking at a year ago or 8 months ago or a year and a half ago, that showed that the NDP was doing really, really quite well. You know, the UCP sort of got this bump in the polls when it was announced that Jason Kenney was going to be resigning back in May, and that only sort of seems to have continued through the summer. Couple explanations for this. Of course, the pandemic measures being lifted certainly has made a lot of people a lot happier. And the really good economic news, frankly, the $13 billion surplus that was announced the other week, those are things that are only going to be good for an incumbent government. But, you look at that polling and then, in a few weeks' time, we're going to have a new premier. So hard to say where that polling might go with Danielle Smith in the Premier's chair, or Travis Taves, or Brian Jean, or Leela here. You never really know.
And how that Premier is going to resonate with a lot of Albertans, depending upon what side of the fence you stand right now. Now, the UCP leadership hopefuls are now discussing another major reform, and that is overhauling Alberta's health services. Danielle Smith says she wants to fire the AHS board and decentralize control of the province's healthcare system.
Yeah, and I believe that's echoed by Travis Taves as well, who's talked about giving, I think, $50 million to sort of rural medical centers and reforming some of the billing for people in more remote areas. Brian Jean has talked about changing the role of the chief medical officer of health to make it sort of less powerful, I think, more accountable. So this is a topic of conversation very much at the moment, and it's kind of interesting, I would say, because we've sort of been through this before, right? We've gone through a decentralization and a re-centralization, for example, of AHS. They talk about what to do about rural healthcare and rural medicine has been going on for a considerable amount of time. The question I think that is going to become one for voters in the year ahead, is to what extent is there meat on the bones of these promises? How much are these things actually resonating with people? But it is interesting, a little bit of a new front in things we're talking about here, not just the autonomy question. And some experts pointing out in news stories this week that, sort of caught my eye, that there's been quite a bit of talk, when I mentioned the chief medical officer of health thing, the accountability stuff, there's a lot of discussion about COVID and the pandemic and sort of the power of public health, and a little bit less conversation, I think would be fair to say, about some of the nuts and bolts issues. How are you going to get more doctors to Grand Prairie or Peace River or Beaver Lodge or something like that? So it'll be interesting to see how that conversation evolves in the weeks ahead.
Tyler, the National Police Federation, the RCMP union, is pushing to keep the RCMP right here in Alberta. No provincial police force, but the RCMP. And it's an idea that's apparently resonating with some of the UCP leadership hopefuls.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We've talked about it before that the Kenny government has sort of been studying this and pushing this, and it hasn't resulted in a clean break with some of the leadership hopefuls. Danielle Smith is in favor of it. Travis Taves is in favor of it. Brian Jean is sort of in favor of it. Some of the other candidates are not, but it is being picked up and discussed. So what this sort of sets up is a little bit of a confrontation should one of these pro-Alberta Provincial Police Force candidates become the premier, because the National Police Federation has, I believe it's 92 signatories now of this sort of call to action, open letter kind of thing, saying to keep the RCMP in Alberta. And many of them are sort of small town municipalities and rural areas that are currently served by the RCMP. And even if they are the ones feeling some of the issues with response time and rural crime and things like that, they are leery of bringing in a new provincial police force.
Lethbridge West MLA and my MLA, Shanna Phillips, announced that she will be running again here in the Windy City. But a couple of other prominent MLAs will not be returning to the ledge, including Doug Schweitzer and Darren Billis. Tyler, how will this really impact the UCP as we move forward to the next year's provincial election?
It does provide a little bit of, sort of fun speculation, let's say, about what a party might do in power, where that party might be going. And I mean, it's no surprise, I don't think, that Shannon Phillips is going to run again, relatively prominent member of Rachel Notley's team. And that sort of thing. But there's going to be more of this, I guess, is the point. As we come up on the election, there's going to be more people who are running again. There's probably going to be some controversy with candidates trying to shoehorn their way in or trying to oust current candidates in nomination battles, or current MLAs in nomination battles, I should say. So it's worth keeping an eye on, even if it's not, explosively sort of front page news.
Coming up after the break, we find out what makes Medicine Hat a city so attractive to young families and businesses alike. Stay tuned for that and more. Medicine Hat, Alberta has been known for its vast natural gas reserves, hot sunny summers, and mild winters. Over the years, the region has grown with a wide variety of businesses and is a safe city for both seniors and young families. Lisa Kowalchuk, Executive Director for the Medicine Hat Chamber of Commerce, joined producer Michael Clausen for a chat about the business climate and the future potential of this southeastern Alberta city.
Now, as we have a few months left in 2022, what are some of the wins for businesses in the Hat this year?
I think so many of our communities can probably say the same, just in terms of the resiliency of our businesses and making it through kind of the global pandemic and the different innovations that we saw with our businesses, from different workforce strategies to, so many of our businesses, particularly our restaurants, putting out patios so that they could serve their businesses, and seeing those continue beyond and being able to create spaces and experiences for their patrons and for our community. I think, another win and success within our community is, despite some of the challenges, we still saw a number of business start up during a very difficult time, taking that risk and that challenge and, surviving through and becoming very successful. So it's really neat to see, again, the strength and resiliency of our business community and those connections and the deeper connections, I think, that have been formed and continue to grow within our community. So it's a really strong presence of our entrepreneurs and that entrepreneurial mindset that we have, in particular, I think, across Alberta, and we see it in Southern Alberta in particular, the willingness to take risks, and certainly even those that have expanded their businesses.
Yes. Yeah, it is great to see, especially the collaboration between businesses. I know my friend Ryan, who's a carpenter in Medicine Hat, he built the outdoor staging, as it were, for the Mad Hatter. And of course, the local's always a great spot to spend the summer outside while visiting with friends. So that is great to see. How about some of the challenges for 2022?
Yeah, I think, again, this is probably, reflected in a lot of communities, but it has been increasingly difficult for business because of that accelerating pace of change and constant change that they're having to adapt to. You put in a global pandemic and the economic, fiscal, regulatory environment that they're having to deal with. Even in terms of the technological shift. So obviously that was accelerated in the last 2 years out of necessity. But, a decade ago, smartphones really didn't exist. 3 decades ago, no one really owned a computer when you look back in time in terms of households. And we have demographic changes that are impacting us, workforce and workplace trends that are becoming redefined with automation and remote work and new forms of work and the gig economy. Technology obviously is accelerating at an exponential pace, and there's more cybersecurity needed and more challenges and big data and AI and blockchain. So, you look at all of those things, and I always say, we're very fortunate that we have different skills, expertise, and resources as a chamber that we can tap into. But, businesses really need to be connected, resilient, and resourceful, because there are so many different things that are impacting their business and constant changes in political trends and just the global economy overall.
I was chatting last night with one of my high school friends who is a real estate sales member. And he was actually telling me that his office gets a lot of calls from Canadians in Manitoba and Ontario about moving to Medicine Hat. Can you share with us a few things that attracts those young families to the area?
Well, I think it's, the quality of life. When you look at the pace of life and the cost of living, I mean, it certainly has been top of mind in terms of affordability across our country. And so I think more and more people are looking at just the cost of living and affordability, and Medicine Hat provides that in terms of the housing market, residential tax rates, an accessible, walkable community. So I think that's very attractive to a lot of people, and they're looking to escape kind of the busyness of the larger centers and looking to mid-sized centers like ours, where you still have all of the amenities and you still have opportunities. But it's not quite this, it's not an hour commute to work. You can get anywhere in the city in, 15 minutes. And so I think that's very attractive. It's a safe community. So, when people are looking at raising a young family, it's certainly a place you want to go, certainly a place that I've invested in personally, and why I call Medicine Hat home.
When we return, we have a look at one of the oldest sports in North America, the Indian Horse Relay. Stay with us. The Indian Horse Relay is an exciting horse and rider team event that takes place on a racetrack. Competitors race against each other on horseback to determine which team can complete the required number of laps on the track the fastest. And just to make it more difficult, the players have to run and jump onto a different horse's back at the beginning of each leg of the race. Skip Daniels is a horse relay coach on the Bearspaw First Nation. He says that when he saw some troubled youth playing with horses, he had an idea to train them to become good athletes.
These are troubled kids, that high-risk kids that just come from like broken homes, and they're just going nowhere. So I called them back. One of them comes up. They didn't trust me at first. I told them, hey, you guys want to do this, with other tribes? You guys want to do this on a professional level? And I said, sure, but they didn't believe me, hey, because they were let down so many times. So I said, all right, yeah, come on. These kids are rough kids. Since I started, that was 2 years ago. They've been out of trouble and clean for 2 years since we started. Because in our culture, horses are healers, right? They have this sort of connection to us.
Sometimes you just need to take a long ride on a horse to get your mind off the day's problems. The Lethbridge Therapeutic Riding Association is hosting the Ride for Dreams event over the weekend for youth and adult riders. It begins at Pavan Park as they will make their way to the Oldman River and back. There are some huge prizes available to the riders that raise the most money. The event will also honor a special member named Joanne Perlich, who passed away recently. Jason Schreiner, the executive director of the association, says all of the funds raised will go to support the LTRA.
we have for the past 45 years offered horseback riding to children and young adults with a varying range of complicated physical and psychological diagnoses. That work continues to this date as a result of the generosity and the funds raised through events like the Ride for Dreams. We've expanded into a range of other types of equine therapies. So we collaborate with AHS here at the farm doing mental health and addiction work. So that is not necessarily mounted work, so it's experiential with the horses. So grooming, touch, leading experiences on the farm. We're doing work with rec therapy, occupational therapy, which is really exciting.
Here in Alberta, we have regular reports of major drug busts taking place, just like the one we mentioned earlier in the show. However, we want to share one program in Lethbridge that has been making a positive impact on drug users. A drug treatment court was started in November of 2020. Chelsea DeGroot, the regional director for Lethbridge Drug Treatment Court program, says the initiative has been successful so far. She recently outlined exactly what the drug treatment court does in our city.
The Lethbridge Drug Treatment Court is for offenders who have committed crimes due to their drug habits. And so usually that's trafficking drugs and or committing crimes to feed their drug addiction. We do not take commercial dealers that are looking at, gaining financial means from that, from their trafficking. And so it's for offenders who are looking at 1 to 5 years of custody. And so this is kind of a way to keep them in community and rehabilitate them and not sending them to jail.
There are currently 7 people in the program. In order for a drug treatment court application to be approved, the person has to first plead guilty to any charges they are facing. As millions struggle to recover from the monsoons that wiped out so many villages in Pakistan, Canadians are providing life-saving emergency supplies through Samaritan's Purse. The Calgary-based Christian relief organization is shipping 4 containers of supplies to Pakistan. To learn more about this humanitarian work in more detail, our own Hal Roberts spoke with Frank King, News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse.
Frank, what kind of aid are we talking about here?
We're talking about a whole lot of aid, Hal. We're planning on shipping we are shipping 4 containers of supplies to Pakistan, including more than 5,000 kitchen sets, 5,400 emergency water filters, and 10,000 bags of dehydrated vegetable soup mix, which is the equivalent of 1 million meal servings. So we're doing our very best thanks to our generous Canadian donors.
Now, even before the devastating flooding hit many parts of Pakistan, your group was already providing aid and planting seeds for Christ?
That is correct. Even before the flooding started, we were there and we were providing food, shelter, water, and medical care for thousands of families. And then as it became clear just the magnitude of these monsoon floods, we started to ramp up our response correspondingly.
Coming up after the break, we hear more about cryptocurrency mining in Medicine Hat from Ryan Chernesky, Director of Modern Mining. That's next, so stay with us.